You have been involved in so many things, and you might say you've had an awful lot of careers, and we're here to talk about your career as an artist, as a photographer, as a nature photographer. How did you get involved in your artwork?
Well, I got interested in photography when the days of color were not here. Had a dark room, did my own developing, had little scales I'd measure the chemicals and made my own prints and so forth, and that just led on and on and on. I was a photographer for the Yale high school yearbook and so forth. So I just kept
lifelong endeavor.
Pretty much, yeah. But it's always been a hobby. It hadn't been something real serious.
Let's talk a little bit about the rest of your life and how it fits in. You are a lawyer in Greenville. Are you from the Upstate?
Yep, from Greenville all my life, yeah.
And went off to school, to Yale and to Virginia.
Virginia Law School, yeah.
Came back here and started practicing law?
With the firm. It was a family firm then, and it's grown from 3 lawyers to 35 lawyers now.
You were doing photography from an early age.
Yeah.
Has it always been, have you always had time to do it as with the interest that you have now?
No, I got interested in getting serious, I guess, from just showing point and shoot photographs of my children and activities outdoors. I got interested in serious photography when I got involved in the conservation effort. And I wanted to do a book describing what we have around us here. And that led me to get a little more serious and trying harder.
Well, you said that you started black and white. When you decided to start getting serious, it wasn't just for love of photography, but it was to use as a tool.
Right.
Tell me how you went about doing it, because your books are beautiful, and they really do, without artifice, it seems to me, really show the true beauty of this area of the country.
Well, that's easy to do because this is an extraordinary piece of geography in our backyard here in the Greenville area. And in the book I did called The Blue Wall, it was definitely done as a selling tool to try to make that project become a reality, which is a real big, major conservation project.
Now tell us about that project.
That project involved the trying to raise funds to purchase the 60,000 acres from Duke Power Company, which is around Lake Jocassee for those who are familiar with Lake Jocassee. And not many people realize this, but nearly all of the national parks of the United States were preceded by some sort of photographic book.
Is that right?
That went to members of Congress and went to the important people, the President of the United States. And otherwise, it's really hard to get somebody more than 100 miles away from the site to take the trouble to go look at it. And the book serves that purpose.
So the Blue Wall, and I want you to tell us about where that name comes from and how that relates to the Jocassee project, but that served as a selling tool.
From my perspective, that's why I did it. I did it very full court press in a hurry, and who knows what effect it had, but it ended up in the hands of every legislator in South and North Carolina and every member of Congress that it was relevant to, and the governors, lieutenant governors of both states, and a lot of people just in general. So the name Blue Wall is a name that comes from the Cherokee Indians' description of our mountains. They called it the Blue Wall because anybody that lives up here knows that the mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, are the Blue Wall.
Right.
And the Indians used the word Blue Wall, so I borrowed that name from them.
So you decided that you needed a book to sell this idea. Yep. How did you go about doing it?
Well,
I mean, because here you are, a point and shoot photographer, and not someone who has published major books before. How did you go about deciding what to put in the book, how to shoot it, how long did it take?
Well, I'd done an earlier book called South Carolina Mountain Wilderness, where the publisher, I sent him outline of the book, some of the photographs. John Fielder of Westcliff Publishing. Of course, I was totally unknown to the publishing world, and he was understandably a little nervous about using a neophyte, so he asked me if I'd be willing to do it with Tom Blagden, who was a well-recognized outdoor photographer, and I said, sure. And Tom and I worked together. Excuse me, he did half the pictures, and I did the other half, and I did all the text of the South Carolina mountain wilderness. So that gave me sort of
Gave you a little credibility.
gave me credibility with the publisher, and then he was very happy to do the Blue Wall. And the way I went about it, of course, is to try to take photographs that represented the great historical, pictorial opportunities of the mountains, the waterfalls. There are probably more waterfalls within 20 miles of where we're sitting than any other place in the country as far as concentration of waterfalls. And you had mountains with good views and just endless opportunities for beautiful pictures. You could hardly go wrong taking a photo. It was so spectacular.
That really sort of brings me to my other idea, because I've done a little photography myself, and I've judged photography in contests, but I think one of the hardest things that photographers have to do is to, once they've shot all of these photographs, is to decide which ones are the best. And that's where really artistic considerations have to come into play. Certainly, you're trying to tell a particular story, so you want certain pictures,
Right.
and the best of those pictures. But how do you go about deciding which pictures make the cut?
When I take a picture, I'm fairly confident that what I've taken, if it comes out like I see it, it's going to be something I like. And that's where the picture is created, is in creating it on the lens, in the viewfinder of the camera.
Are you using digital or working with film?
Still working with film. All of my books have been with mid-size format, 6 by 7 centimeters. I use an RZ67, which Tom Blagden recommended that I buy. And I bought it, and it's 10 years old now, and it's still a fantastic
Still
camera.
doing the job.
Still doing the job, yeah. Great camera.
How do you get that moment? I mean, with a photographer, very different from a painter, because there are things that a painter is in control of, and I would think many more things that a painter is in control of than a photographer.
Yeah.
You're not out there making the scene. God has made that scene. Nature has made that scene. But what are the things that you bring to the table to be able to translate that into a good photograph or a work of art?
Well, sometimes you've got to seize the moment, especially with the sun moving around. The sun moves incredibly fast, and you'd be surprised to see it. All of a sudden it's here and then there, and the picture's gone. I don't mean to compare myself with Ansel Adams, but I think that's what he did. He could spot something that was great and take a picture real fast. That's sometimes. One of my pictures in the Blue Wall is I was driving by Caesar's Head, and I could see the light coming through the clouds, and I really jumped out of my car and ran to the edge of Caesar's Head and took 2 pictures, and then it was gone. It was less than a minute.
Yeah, wow.
So, but that's rare. If the sun's just right, then you would want to move quickly, but sometimes it takes me a half hour to get a picture set like I want it, even a still picture where you don't have to hurry. So it's hard to define, but you know it when you got it.
When you were working on the Blue Wall book, what are some of the stories behind some of the pictures in that? Because I'd like like for our viewers to see some of those pictures as well as the one we've talked about.
Well, I mentioned the one with the sunlight shining through the clouds from
Right, at Caesar's Head. And I should mention that we're in Jones Gap State Park,
Right.
with a wonderful stream in the background, and we're sort of below Caesar's Head. It's up the mountain behind us.
2,000 feet above you.
Absolutely.
Above us, yeah. And, of course, sunsets, I've got a picture taken looking through the leaves onto Lake Kiowee, I believe it was, and that was kind of a memorable experience. I can remember most of the pictures when I look at them in the book, where I was and what I was doing, but to verbalize it is really hard. It's really hard to do. Waterfalls. I'm out of step with the rest of the world on waterfalls because most photographers love the creamy image of the waterfall. I don't think that looks like a waterfall. And I go the opposite direction. I try to take as fast a shutter speed as I can get.
So you see the droplets. You don't
Almost
see the blur.
Well, you don't see the droplets. I don't try to get it that much, like a thousandth of a second, but I want it to be where it doesn't look like milk or cream. And I've got one picture in the blue wall that was taken of icicles, ice forming on
the Galix?
on the waterfall. No,
or on the waterfall.
On the waterfall.
I saw that one as well.
And I pushed my film. I used a film speed of 800 in calculating the exposure, although it was only 400.
Mm-hmm.
And I had it, you can process it to take care of the underexposure because I wanted to stop that movement of the water. And if it had been the typical milky shot, that would not have the power that that particular waterfall shot, in my opinion, has. But most photographers seem to love that creamy stuff.
Some of the photographers in the early history of photography, the nature photographers, were using the very large format cameras, and you wonder how in the world they hauled all of that stuff around in the wilderness and got those incredible shots. Yours versions are much more portable, certainly, but how much work is it in the books that you've done to get to the places that you want to shoot? Do you have to hike for hours to? Tell me about that. And
it's a big operation, and somehow I feel like the more I hurt myself getting way away, the better chance I get a good picture, which doesn't make any sense
because you're
at all.
paying your dues.
I'm paying my dues.
You did the sweat, and now
yeah.
nature needs to reward you.
I'm out about 4 or 5 hours with about 30 pounds on my back, hiking, sometimes pretty steep.
Do you camp out at the same time, or do you haul it in and haul it back?
I can't camp out because I can't carry a sleeping bag and
with all of your...
I can get some buddies to do that. Every now and then I'll go on a photo expedition and we'll camp out and they'll help carry some of my weight. But normally I got to come home. Plus I'm so tired at the end of the day I couldn't probably go another day. Anyway.
What's the project you're working on now?
I'm working on another book which is going to be called Cycles of Nature, which is a little bit ambitious, I think, just to say that, and it's going to be tough to put together, but it will deal with cycles of nature like the rainfall, evaporation, everybody knows about, and the lunar cycle, and a real interesting cycle I'm going to be dealing with is the cycle of the decay caused by the fungus. That's a whole other world I really didn't know about until I got to researching it. So that book may come out this time next year, if I'm lucky.
One of the things that I've noticed in the few times that I've carried a camera is that because I want to make a good picture, I am so much more observant and I see so much more that I would not consciously be looking for things that are worth putting on film.
Right.
Is that the way you are, or are you always looking for that shot, whether you have a camera around your neck or not?
I think I see things a lot more acutely now since I've been doing this for 10 years than I did before, because I do see pictures everywhere I go now.
You're quite an outdoorsman as well as you work with photography. You've traveled around the world. I'd like to hear a little bit about that and know if you took pictures on those trips as well, or was it only your need to have a tool to preserve the beauty of this part of the country that got you going?
Well, I've been on a couple backpacking trips in Alaska, and I always carry a camera. This 35 millimeter there, though, so I can handle it. And I'm taking pictures there. I've canoed the Chattooga River a lot, and I've always taken not always, but frequently taken photographs. And I've done some scuba diving, and I've got an underwater camera to fiddle with. So most of my trips I am taking pictures, but they're not they're not serious pictures in the sense of arty kinds, but they're serious, just the mementos of the trip.
You've published the books. Do you also sell individual works?
I don't try to market any of my photographs, but friends that want them, I'm happy to sell them to them at basically the cost of producing it. I don't try to market them.
Mm-hmm.
And all the money I get goes to Natural Land Trust anyway, so I don't make any profit off any of them.
The getting back to what I mentioned when we started talking about your being a Renaissance man and having other careers, I'd like to talk a little bit about your work in conservation. And I read your resume, and there were quite a few state, local, national honors in that. What has been your interest? How did you get interested? And what are some of the things that you've done?
I think it's been going back, it goes back 30 years, but I think probably it got next to me, inspired me, or got me concerned when I went to visit a friend in Los Angeles, high school buddy. And Los Angeles is surrounded by not real steep mountains, but mountains. And I was just dumbfounded about the fact that every mountain had a gated community access to it. There wasn't any in my short trip there. That's what I remember most about Los Angeles, is all the mountains surrounding the city were gated communities. There's nothing wrong with a gated community, but when they eat up the entire mountains, that's too much for me. So when I came back to Greenville, I got to thinking about that. And I said, sooner or later, all of our mountains, which are 30 miles away, will become gated communities. And as it has happened, as you probably know, every piece of not preserved mountain land is now a gated community. I think almost without exception, from here to Georgia. So that got me, I think back then it got me concerned, and then I started thinking, what can I do about it? And I've done a lot of real estate work, and I've got tax records, and I put together all the property owners on a map going from here to there, and colored them different colors and identified the names of the property owners, and I started knocking on doors to see if the property owners would be willing to help in this effort. And the Caesar's Head area, which is called the Mountain Bridge Wilderness, was about 12,000 acres. And with the exception of one property owner, I was able to put together every one of those tracts of land, which is there today. And then I worked on the Greenville Water Systems Watershed, which is about 9,000 acres of table rock, about 20,000 of the North Saluda River. And I worked on that about 15 years to get the water commissioners to agree to permanently protect their watersheds, which they finally did about 10 years ago. And so that finished the entire Mountain Bridge Wilderness except that one property owner I struck out on, and that is now being developed as a gated community.
You also, I understand, had what might be considered another career in support of downtown Greenville.
Yeah, downtown Greenville was a major, major project, and I claim only partial credit because there were so many people involved in that, and we had such a terrible situation downtown. It's unbelievable what it was.
Typical dying downtown,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Empty retail spaces.
Mm-hmm. No lights on the street after dark, nobody on the street after dark, no stores on the street, daylight or dark. And Greenville today is one of the outstanding cities in the country, I think, as far as its downtown.
Absolutely, certainly widely recognized,
Yeah,
and lots of folks coming in to
Yeah.
to take a look at what you've done. What role did you play in that?
Well, the group I work with, the role we played, I think, was to, and I give Max Heller a lot of credit, and my longtime buddy Buck
Former
Mickle.
mayor.
Yeah, and Buck Mickle, one of my best friends, who's now dead. We worked real hard to get planning done first, and then with Max Heller's help, he was able to get a federal grant, and we were able to get a developer to come in and modify the plans. It's a long story, but that's where it got started. But there's a lot of support. And the business community of Greenville put up $5 million to do the Hyatt Hotel, for example.
Right.
And they never expected, they never will see any of that money back, but that's what gave
That was a huge catalyst
Yeah.
for it. That and then the Peace Center.
Right. Then the Peace Center followed that. And then the narrowing of Main Street, I think, was a critical decision. We were out of step with what every other city was doing. I say out of step. We were doing it differently. Mm-hmm. And I give credit to the people that did the design work for coming up with that idea. Most cities were shutting their Main Street down and turning it into a shopping mall,
right.
like Spartanburg did. And I don't think that worked anywhere.
It did not work there.
So anyway, that was a thumbnail sketch of what we did.
One thing that I found particularly interesting and unexpected in looking at a resume of just some of the highlights of your background is the last thing on the list was that you hold several patents.
Yeah.
And it made me think, and I don't want to embarrass you by saying this, but it made me think of Michelangelo, who was a sculptor and an incredible visual artist, but he knew so many things about other things, and he was out there inventing all sorts of things, and here you are inventing as well.
That's a real stretch.
Tell me, well, you've got patents, so tell me about some of those. And in fact, one of the things that I wanted to mention is here we have this book that you have put together, Mountain Bridge Trails, about the wonderful trails of the Upstate. And as I turn into it, there are some look like some satellite maps. Here's a little bit of one showing trails. Mm-hmm. All right, folds out.
Three-dimensional perspective.
This relates to one of your patents, right?
Yeah, it's a patent to take hiking trails and turn them into three-dimensional perspective images. And to make that, I got a wheel and compass and personally hiked all 50 miles of these trails and wrote down the distance and wrote down the compass bearing. And then we got on the computer and typed in the courses and distances, and the guy that was helping me knew how to turn the geodetic survey into a map that showed these ups and downs.
The ridges.
The ridges.
So,
and put that on top of it.
Well, I mean, it's enormously useful. As someone who enjoys hiking, and I'm out on the trail, and I'm wondering, do I go right or do I go left here? Is this
go up or you go down?
Yeah, and this lets you see where you're going in 3 dimensions.
Right.
A wonderful new idea and a very practical application. What about your other patents?
My other patent is totally worthless. It's called the adjustable rung ladder, which I did for mountain trails like this. To my somewhat dismay, I've got some metal rungs made so that when I needed to build, I laid out all these hiking trails, and then I had kids from high school and college build them over about a 10-year period. And every now and then you'd come to a place where you needed a ladder. And what I thought I'd do is just cut 2 trees down and take my metal rungs, fasten them into the tree. But the tree didn't cooperate because it was sort of out of shape. Wasn't exactly parallel, so those rungs would not fit. So that led me to think of an adjustable rung ladder, which the rung now will adjust to the tree's variation.
Okay.
And it screws in. It really works. They've been up there for 10 years. So it's an adjustable rung ladder. Nobody in the world would ever want to buy an adjustable rung. But that's the background.
Except someone making a trail.
Making trails, yeah.
Well, obviously, necessity and need is the mother of invention.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Any more pictures in your future?
Well, except for this book I'm working on now. I think if I get that done, I may take a breath for a year or 2. But that's all I've got on the plate right now.
Very good. Well, we wish you luck with it. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Appreciate all the nice things you said.
The creative mind of Tommy Wyche, a man who's already made his mark on the history and the landscape of the Upstate, an artist who brings innovation to everything he does, and a Peter Pan who must get out of bed every morning with the enthusiasm and the curiosity of a 9-year-old. Tommy Wyche, an artist with a camera, but more importantly, an artist who brings his creativity to everything he does. His is a spirit of creativity that we should all try to bring to our lives. I'm Everett Powers.